At the end of World War II, the Soviet Union endured an unprecedented level of casualties, surpassing any other nation in modern history. The sheer magnitude of these losses continues to perplex historians, prompting questions about the underlying factors that led to such staggering human suffering. While it's easy to attribute these casualties to the brutal reality of warfare, the truth is far more complex and goes deeper. To truly understand the depth of Soviet casualties, one must delve into the intricate web of political, social, and military dynamics that shaped the course of the war. Every facet of Soviet society was deeply intertwined with the conflict. However, the complexity of the issue lies in the sobering reality that a significant portion of these casualties were not solely attributable to enemy action. Rather, many lives were lost due to internal factors within the Soviet Union itself. During the span from June 22, 1941 to May 9, 1945, the Eastern Front of World War II bore witness to a harrowing saga of warfare between the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany, alongside its allies. This period saw staggering casualties, with historian David Glantz estimating that the Red Army suffered a total of 28 million casualties. Among these, approximately 10 million soldiers lost their lives in combat, while another 18 million were wounded or captured. The Eastern Front became synonymous with brutal battles such as the Siege of Leningrad and the Battle of Stalingrad, Kursk, Razev, and many more, where both sides endured immense suffering and sacrifice among civilians and soldiers. In the lead-up to World War II, Stalin's paranoia reached unprecedented levels, epitomized by the infamous period known as the Great Purge. Spanning from 1936 to 1938, this harrowing chapter in Soviet history was characterized by the ruthless directives of Joseph Stalin, the dictator of the Soviet Union. During this time, approximately 1.2 million individuals within the USSR faced dire consequences, with the KGB alone executing 682,000 people between 1937 and 1938. Countless others perished in the grim confines of gulags or met their demise through clandestine means. The overarching objective of the purge was clear. Stalin sought to eradicate any semblance of dissent or opposition to his totalitarian regime. The targets of his merciless campaign included political dissidents, stalwart members of the old Bolsheviks, and anyone perceived as a potential threat to his iron-fisted control over the Soviet state. Through systematic repression, Stalin aimed to solidify his grip on power and eliminate any conceivable challenges to his authority. As Stalin initiated purges within the military ranks, it's crucial to note the profound impact on the highest echelons of command. At the pinnacle of the military hierarchy stood the esteemed title of Marshal of the Soviet Union, introduced in November 1935, with its initial 5 distinguished individuals. However, by the close of 1939, a chilling statistic emerged. Only 2 of the original 5 marshals remained alive. Among the casualties were some of the Soviet Union's most brilliant military strategists and leaders. This purge not only deprived the military of invaluable expertise, but also left a void in leadership that reverberated throughout the armed forces. The loss of these seasoned commanders would have far-reaching implications for the Soviet Union's military capabilities and strategic decision-making during a time of escalating international tensions. One of the most notable commanders that was killed was Tukhachevsky. He emerged as one of the most accomplished and dynamic field commanders in the Red Army, showcasing his prowess during both the Civil War and the Polish-Soviet War. His vigor and adept utilization of the revolutionary fervor within the new Red Army prompted Stalin to liken him to the Little Napoleon. While such a comparison might be seen as praise from others coming from Stalin, it served as a prelude to Tukhachevsky's eventual downfall. He was also a fervent advocate for the modernization of Soviet weaponry and military structure throughout the 1920s and 1930s. Tukhachevsky played a big role in advancing Soviet aviation, mechanized forces, and airborne units. His theoretical contributions were instrumental in shaping Soviet military strategy, particularly the development of the theory of deep operations. Tragically, Tukhachevsky's efforts to propel Soviet military capabilities forward were met with suspicion and betrayal. Accused of treason by Soviet authorities, he endured awful torture and ultimately confessed under duress. His confession led to his execution in 1937. Another notable figure was General Yakir. He made significant contributions to military strategy and tactics during his career. One of his notable innovations was his emphasis on mobile warfare and the use of combined arms tactics. He recognized the importance of coordination between infantry, armor, artillery, and air support in achieving battlefield success. Yakir's strategies focused on maneuverability, surprise attacks, and exploiting enemy weaknesses, which proved effective during the Russian Civil War and later conflicts. Despite his military prowess, Yakir's career met a tragic end during Stalin's purges in the late 1930s. In 1937, he was arrested and accused of being involved in an anti-Soviet conspiracy. Despite protesting his innocence, Yakir was subjected to a show trial and ultimately executed in 1938. His death, along with the deaths of many other talented military officers, was a severe blow to the Soviet military and left a void in the leadership that would be keenly felt during World War II. Interestingly, Konstantin Rokossovsky, otherwise known as Steel Teeth, we will get to why in a moment, was one of the greatest Soviet commanders of World War II, was born in Poland, which was then part of the Russian Empire. He volunteered for the Russian army during World War I and later joined the Red Army after the Bolshevik Revolution. In 1937, during Stalin's purges, Rokossovsky, a senior officer in the Red Army, was arrested due to his Polish background and criticism of Soviet tactics. He endured brutal torture. His toes were smashed with a hammer, his fingernails were removed with pliers, and his ribs were broken. Among the injuries he sustained, the most permanent resulted when 9 of his front teeth were pulled. The teeth were later replaced with stainless steel dentures. He would never confess to being a traitor. Released in 1940 without explanation, he went on to gain fame for his tactical brilliance during the war. These examples vividly illustrate the ruthless methods employed by Stalin and the NKVD in dealing with their own officers. Rokossovsky's survival, despite enduring such horrific torture, highlights the precariousness of life under Stalin's regime. Indeed, the purges orchestrated by Stalin not only resulted in the loss of countless skilled commanders, but also severely depleted the ranks of experienced military leaders in the Soviet Union. The ramifications of these purges were keenly felt during the initial stages of World War II. The absence of seasoned commanders undoubtedly hampered the Soviet Union's military effectiveness and strategic planning, with many of their most capable leaders either executed or imprisoned. The Soviet forces struggled to adapt to the rapidly evolving battlefield dynamics. Today's video is proudly sponsored by Manta Sleep. Manta Sleep specializes in crafting premium sleep masks and functional sleep accessories. Now, you might be wondering how this relates to World War II history. Well, let me explain. Even during wartime, quality sleep was crucial for soldiers and leaders alike. In fact, sleep is a powerful weapon in everyday life. Manta Sleep not only offers top-notch sleep masks, but is driven by a mission to improve lives through better sleep. Given the prevalence of sleep issues today, a good night's rest could have been a rare luxury during historical times and people today. And managing this history-focused YouTube channel can be demanding. As someone with a deep passion for history, I understand the importance of balancing a busy schedule with proper rest. Manta Sleep's adjustable masks ensure a perfect fit for everyone, providing 100% blackout with incredibly soft and breathable materials. The eye cups eliminate any pressure on your eyes, allowing you to relax in comfort. Whether you prefer the cool mask, the steam mask, or even the weighted mask, Manta Sleep has you covered. With cooling, perforated foam around the eyes, even studio lights shining on my face fade away, leaving me feeling relaxed and immersed in darkness. Be sure to check them out in the description below, or use the code HISTORYATWAR to save 10% on your purchase. In June 1941, the German forces launched what would become known as the largest invasion in history, the invasion of the Soviet Union. Termed a preemptive strike by the Germans, it marked a pivotal moment in World War II. However, the motivations behind this invasion remain a subject of historical debate. While the Germans asserted they were acting to prevent a Soviet offensive aimed at expanding their influence into Western Europe, many historians question the validity of this claim. The possibility of a Soviet invasion of Germany for Western European influence is a contentious issue. While some argue that Stalin may have harbored such ambitions, the extent to which concrete plans existed is uncertain. The historical record offers glimpses of strategic discussions within the Soviet leadership, but definitive evidence of an imminent invasion remains elusive. There was a massive buildup of Soviet armour along the border, the concentration of the Red Army, rather than behind prepared defensive lines along the old Poland-Soviet border, left them vulnerable to the German onslaught. This strategic disposition, coupled with other factors, contributed to the initial success of the German invasion and posed significant challenges for the Soviet defence. But why was this? Was the Soviet Union in an attack position? It is also important to note, in the lead-up to the German invasion of the Soviet Union in June 1941, the Red Army indeed held a numerical advantage over the German forces. With the Soviets boasting around 90 motorized divisions and approximately 200 infantry divisions, compared to the Germans' roughly 30 motorized divisions and 100 infantry divisions, the scale of Soviet manpower was formidable. While the Soviet divisions outnumbered their German counterparts, many of these Soviet divisions were still in the process of being fully equipped and manned with ongoing training and preparations. However, this expansive build-up suggests a strategic intent beyond mere defensive posturing. The sheer size of the Soviet military machine, coupled with ongoing expansion efforts, implied an underlying intention to leverage this numerical superiority for offensive operations. During the period spanning from June 1941 to December 1941 of that year, which encompasses a mere 5.5 months, the Red Army endured staggering casualties totaling around 4.5 million. Remarkably, this figure surpassed the initial estimates of German military planners regarding the size of the Soviet forces. This phase was marked by severe deficiencies in Soviet leadership, characterized by poor strategic direction and an inflexible command structure that hindered effective tactical maneuvers, including necessary withdrawals. Many put this to the massive Soviet armor concentration at the border and at the early phase of the invasion. This phase of the war also witnessed desperate attempts by the Soviet forces to stem the German advance through a series of costly counter-offensives using World War I tactics compared to fully mobilized armored divisions. These efforts, though valiant, only exacerbated the casualties suffered by the Red Army as they struggled to halt the relentless momentum of the German offensive.
The 8th of August 1941. As we pushed deeper into Soviet territory, it seemed like every corner we turned revealed another group of bewildered and disoriented Red Army soldiers. They stumbled out of hiding places, their weapons discarded or raised in futile defiance against our relentless onslaught. Some surrendered willingly, while others had to be rounded up by force. The scale of the Soviet losses was staggering. I couldn't help but feel a sense of awe mingled with horror as I witnessed the sheer number of enemy combatants we were capturing. They came in droves, their faces etched with exhaustion and despair. Many were barely more than boys, thrust into the chaos of war without understanding the full extent of the conflict they were embroiled in. Taking in thousands of prisoners in a single day became routine, but it never ceased to amaze me. Our supply lines strained under the weight of the influx, and makeshift prison camps sprung up hastily to accommodate the swelling ranks of captives. As I surveyed the battlefield, I couldn't help but wonder what the future held in store. The early successes had filled us with a sense of invincibility, but beneath the surface lurked the spectre of uncertainty. We were all thinking a massive Ivan counterattack would soon be underway.
In July 1941, the fight to Moscow, the First Battle of Smolensk, proved to be a significant setback for the Soviet Union, resulting in nearly 1 million casualties and prisoners, highlighting critical weaknesses in their military strategy and coordination. The Soviet Red Army suffered staggering losses, overwhelmed by the German blitzkrieg tactics and superior firepower. Poor coordination among Soviet units and logistical challenges hindered their ability to mount a cohesive defense during this battle. The German forces, employing combined arms tactics and exploiting Soviet vulnerabilities, swiftly captured Smolensk, but it wasn't easy. The Germans also suffered. The battle underscored the enormous human and material cost of the conflict for the Soviet Union and marked a crucial phase in the early stages of Operation Barbarossa and the drive to Moscow. As winter set in during October 1941, the Soviet defences around Moscow were not fully prepared, leaving gaps in their lines that the German forces exploited with alarming ease. The lack of coordination among Soviet units further exacerbated the situation. The Soviet high command was in complete disarray. Stalin was nowhere to be seen, and a quick plan had to be made. The disorganization of the Soviets allowing the Germans to make significant advances towards the Soviet capital. However, the dire situation spurred the Soviets into action, and they devised a daring plan to repel the German attackers and stabilize the front. Despite the bravery and determination of the Soviet soldiers, the battle was fiercely contested, with both sides suffering heavy losses. Over 500,000 Soviet casualties were recorded in this desperate struggle to defend Moscow. Nevertheless, the Soviet counteroffensive gradually gained momentum, sending man after man, bolstered by reinforcements from Siberia and Asia, the strategic use of the harsh winter conditions to their advantage. The ferocity of the Soviet resistance, combined with the logistical challenges faced by the German forces and the onset of winter, gradually wore down the German advance. As the first year of Operation Barbarossa concludes and we enter 1942, it becomes evident that the Soviet Union faced staggering losses. Much of this can be attributed to a lack of coordination within the high command, creating a chaotic military environment. Compounding, this was the delay in the arrival of Western provisions known as Lend-Lease, which only reached Soviet forces in late 1941. Despite these challenges, the Soviets managed to repel the German assault on the capital by deploying massive waves of manpower, which overwhelmed the German defences in key sectors. However, this tactic also contributed significantly to the high casualty rate of 1941. The Soviet Union's ability to mobilize such large numbers of troops reflects their determination to defend their homeland at all costs, but it also shows how much real strategies the Soviets lacked at this time. During the period from December 1941 to April 1943, the Red Army embarked on a widespread offensive across the entire front, enduring staggering losses totaling around 9 million casualties, including 3.5 million fatalities. Stalin's directives for counterattacks were aimed at ejecting the Germans from Soviet territory, yielding successful offensives in regions such as Rostov and Moscow. Despite initial victories that pushed the Germans back and stabilized the Eastern Front by March 1942, subsequent operations, like the offensive at Kharkov and the Caucasus, encountered setbacks, allowing for German advances. These setbacks show the complexities and challenges faced by the Soviet forces as they sought to regain lost ground and repel the invading German armies. By the end of June 1942, the Germans resumed Operation Blue, pushing hundreds of kilometers into the Caucasus region. However, it was in this theatre of operations that a shift began to occur, with the Red Army displaying a degree of flexibility and adaptability. In 1942, amidst the brutal battle for Stalingrad, Stalin issued one of the most crucial directives to all commanders, Red Army soldiers and political commissars: Order Number 227, famously known as the Not One Step Back Order. This order epitomized the uncompromising resolve of the Soviet leadership in the face of enemy aggression. It demanded unwavering dedication and sacrifice from every soldier, emphasizing that retreat was not an option. They were to fight to the last breath, holding their ground at all costs. 24,000 plus soldiers were reassigned to penal units, where they were sent back into the thick of battle, facing certain death, while well over a few thousand faced execution by firing squad. This data indicates that resorting to shooting panicked soldiers was not the primary objective. Rather, it was considered a measure of last resort, rather than just firing at soldiers simply moving backwards on the battlefield. But regardless, this was a massive contribution to the insane scale of death in Stalingrad. After halting the German advance at Stalingrad and in the Caucasus, the Red Army launched a massive counterattack along the entire front. During that winter, the Red Army launched 4 major operations, with only the Uranus and Saturn operations proving successful despite ultimately suffering setbacks with Manstein's counter-offensive at Kharkov. The North Star and Mars operations, on the other hand, ended in resounding failure. With Operation Mars almost becoming a second Stalingrad, the Soviet deaths were absolutely horrific. The battle for Rjev, a crucial strategic sector on the Eastern Front, was marked by grim and pitiless fighting, resulting in staggering losses for both the Soviet forces. For instance, during the Rjev-Vyazma strategic offensive operation from January to April 1942, the Red Army suffered over 750,000 casualties, with nearly 275,000 fatalities. The ferocity of the combat and the relentless nature of the fighting, with massive Soviet human wave tactics against harsh dug-in German positions. In total, over the span of 15 months, Russian combat losses along the Rjev axis reached approximately 500,000 dead, with at least twice as many wounded. Although German losses were comparatively smaller in numerical terms, their impact was still devastating, especially considering the chronic manpower shortages faced by the Ostheer in the east. German forces consistently inflicted significantly higher casualties on their adversary, maintaining a positive casualty exchange rate. Nevertheless, German losses amounted to several hundred thousand, with perhaps over 100,000 fatalities.
I remember the battles at Rjev vividly, as if they were yesterday. The chaos and carnage were unlike anything I had experienced before. Bodies littered all over the ground, comrades beside me, their faces frozen in eternal agony. We were caught in a relentless onslaught, waves of enemy soldiers hurling themselves at us without hesitation. I was thinking, did these guys even fear death at all? At first we couldn't comprehend their strategy. It seemed senseless, suicidal even. They charged at us, disregarding their own lives, as if they were mere pawns in a game of death. We held our ground, our weapons blazing, cutting down the advancing horde with ruthless efficiency. Their tanks rolled forward, imposing and harsh, wreaking havoc upon our ranks. But still we stood firm, refusing to yield an inch of ground at that time. As the battle raged on, confusion turned to grim determination. We may not have understood their tactics, but we knew one thing for certain. We would not be defeated, and Ivan would do anything to kill us. Each wave of attackers met with a wall of steel and fire, their cries drowned out by the roar of battle. Yet still they came, their numbers seemingly endless. Their commanders were sending young men to their deaths.
Despite discussing battles where the Soviets suffered immense casualties from 1941 to 1942, it's important to note that the hardest challenges were still ahead for them. While the battles previously mentioned were undoubtedly grueling, the Soviet Union would soon face even greater trials and tribulations in death. Between July 1943 and June 1944, the Red Army endured yet another harrowing chapter, experiencing approximately 8.5 million casualties, including 2 million fatalities. This period witnessed significant engagements such as the Battle of Kursk and the lifting of the Siege of Leningrad. Despite demonstrating greater strategic acumen and making fewer tactical errors, the Soviets confronted a formidable German army, leading to sustained high casualty rates despite their numerous offensives. The Battle of Kursk in particular marked a crucial turning point in the war, as the Soviets successfully repelled the German offensive, inflicting heavy losses on the enemy. However, the ferocity of the fighting and the resilience of the German forces exacted a very heavy toll on the Red Army. But why were Soviet casualties so high at Kursk? Even though the Soviets fully prepared for the German onslaught, here is why. The period from 1943 to the summer saw significant challenges for the Soviets due to operational and tactical deficiencies. Many Soviet units were inexperienced, as the casualties suffered from 1941 to the spring of 1943 had decimated the pre-war military and trained forces. This lack of experience was compounded by the ongoing evolution and improvement of the German forces, who had regained their authorized strength by the summer of 1942. Additionally, the Germans held technological superiority in terms of air power and tanks, with their artillery arm being better trained and equipped despite numerical inferiority. During the Citadel operation, the Germans were able to unleash 3 times as many artillery rounds as the Soviets, resulting in significantly higher casualties for the latter in positional warfare scenarios, plus many Soviet armoured formations lacked proper training in many aspects. Subsequent Soviet offensives faced coordination challenges, allowing the Germans to conduct a fighting withdrawal despite being bogged down at Kursk. Poorly executed Soviet advances against General Model's well-prepared defensive positions during Operation Kutuzov led to disproportionate casualties despite numerical superiority. Similarly, during the Belgorod-Kharkov offensive, the Soviets suffered heavy losses despite overwhelming advantages in numbers, equipment and resources. Inexperienced Soviet units, such as the rebuilt 5th Tank Army, struggled against seasoned German formations, resulting in substantial casualties. However, the Soviets' ability to replenish their ranks with conscripts from liberated territories allowed them to maintain momentum despite the staggering losses. Thus, while some claim Soviet operational prowess, the summer fighting of 1943 was characterized by poor tactical and operational performance, mitigated only by the Soviets' ability to absorb losses and replenish their forces with fresh recruits. Beyond the pivotal Battle of Kursk, the Donetsk Basin played host to several other significant events and developments in 1943. Notably, the region's strategic importance stemmed from its industrial prowess, particularly in coal and steel production. Serving as a crucial resource hub for both the Soviet Union and Germany, the Donbass became a prime target for military operations. The Soviet victory in the region forced the German army into a rapid retreat of over 300 kilometers to the Panta-Wotan line along the Dnieper River, still under construction. This retreat inflicted further blows on the already battered German forces while exacting a heavy toll on the Soviets, with approximately 300,000 Soviet casualties adding to the grim death toll of 1943. From June 1944 to May 1945, the Red Army confronted a German military that had been significantly weakened by engagements on the Western Front. Nevertheless, the Soviets endured approximately 6 million casualties during this period, including 1.2 million fatalities. Operation Bagration was a significant Soviet offensive conducted against Germany from June 23rd to August 19, 1944, on the Eastern Front of World War II. This offensive, launched in coordination with the Normandy invasion, capitalized on the declining military strength of the Germans and the growing unreliability of Germany's allies. The Soviet Red Army aimed to exploit this opportunity by delivering a devastating blow to the Germans, comparable in scale to the losses suffered by the Soviets during Operation Barbarossa. Here is when the Soviets really upped their game in power and coordination. The German losses are terrible, as well the Soviets with over 500,000 casualties in this operation. During this date, we also saw the Battle of Courland. The German forces, primarily comprised of the remnants of Army Group North, were encircled by the Soviet Red Army in the Courland region of Latvia. This pocket became a unique theatre of war as the Germans held out for months despite being cut off from the rest of their forces. A notable part of this struggle saw intense fighting as the Germans attempted to break out of the encirclement. However, they were ultimately unsuccessful and the Courland pocket remained until the end of the war, with its defenders surrendering to the Soviets in May 1945. But again, casualties were substantial, with over 160,000 Soviet casualties. We also saw big battles in Romania, Hungary and the Czech Republic, the decisive Vistula-Oder offensive, the battle to Berlin. In April 1945, Marshal Ivan Konev recounted an important meeting with Stalin and Zhukov, where Stalin inquired about who would seize Berlin first, the Soviets or the Allies. Konev boldly asserted that the Soviets would triumph, even surpassing the Anglo-Americans. The Battle of Berlin witnessed staggering Soviet casualties, largely due to the intense rivalry among Soviet commanders. Stalin's paranoia about a race with the Western Allies spurred him to push for an early capture of Berlin, disregarding military pragmatism. Stalin deliberately stoked competition between Zhukov and Konev, fostering a quest for personal glory. This fostered a reckless advance at any cost mindset, overlooking the toll on troops and strategic coherence. The rivalry between Soviet commanders became particularly palpable when Berlin had been completely encircled and the Western Allies were out of the equation. One corps commander of the 8th Guards Army, part of Zhukov's First Byelorussian Front, told war correspondent Vasily Grossman during the last days of fighting, "Now we should be scared not of the enemy but of our neighbours. I've ordered that the burnt-out tanks should be used to block our neighbours from getting to the Reichstag. There's nothing more depressing in Berlin than learning about the successes of your neighbour." His superior General Vasily Chuikov, commanding the 8th Guards Army, was even more forceful. He pushed his left flank across the front of the 3rd Guards Tank Army of Konev's 1st Ukrainian Front to head it off the axis which led to the Reichstag. He did not even warn General Rybalko of the 3rd Guards Tank Army, so this almost certainly led to the slaughter of many of his own men under the artillery shells and rockets of the 1st Ukrainian Front. One officer in Zhukov's First Byelorussian Front accurately summed up both forms of rivalry that made Soviet commanders so extravagant with their men's lives in one dangerous joke. If Konev defeats Zhukov in the race for the Reichstag, Zhukov will shoot himself in the head, but if our Western allies seize the Reichstag before Konev and Zhukov and put an American or a British victory flag in place at the top, Lavrenti Pavlovich Beria, head of the NKVD secret police, will shoot both Zhukov and Konev in their heads. The situation in Berlin was further exacerbated by the relentless determination of the final German defenders, comprising various SS and Heer units, who fiercely resisted until the bitter end. This unwavering commitment resulted in a catastrophic scenario for both sides involved in the conflict. The Soviet forces, driven by their fervent desire to capture the Reichstag, engaged in intense combat, sparing no effort to achieve their objective. Meanwhile, the desperate German defenders, fully aware of the dire circumstances, refused to yield, fighting with unyielding resolve until they met their demise. The Soviets would suffer around 360,000 casualties during the final battle. Historian Roger Rees summarized it pretty accurately. In his book he stated, "I conclude that the Red Army was effective because it was able to keep fighting, despite weak, large and small unit leadership, inadequate training, slipshod planning, unreliable logistics, confusing command structures, meddlesome political interference, a disrupted economy and above all massive casualties." The primary factor contributing to the exceptionally high casualties, as explained in this video, lies in the utilization of wave tactics and the lack of coordination during the initial years of the war. The Soviet High Command struggled to assert control early on, lacking a cohesive strategy or adequate support. Instead, they often resorted to mass deployment of troops into combat zones, hoping for favourable outcomes. This approach led to staggering losses as soldiers were sent into battle without clear objectives or effective coordination, and a complete lack of regard for their own men, exacerbating the already dire situation on the Eastern Front. Once more, a significant contributing factor to the challenges faced by the Soviet military stemmed from a severe lack of military structure. This deficiency was exacerbated by Stalin's purges, which targeted many experienced commanders and officers. As a result, the Soviet forces struggled to maintain effective leadership and coordination, hindering their ability to respond efficiently to the demands of warfare. The loss of seasoned personnel further compounded the difficulties faced by the Soviet Union on the battlefield, adding to the already complex and demanding nature of the conflict. Furthermore, the presence of political commissars and the implementation of severe consequences for retreating added to the challenges faced by the Soviet military. The policy of not one step back instilled by Stalin resulted in harsh penalties, including execution for soldiers who retreated or showed signs of cowardice. This created an atmosphere of fear and distrust within the ranks, as soldiers were compelled to continue fighting even in dire circumstances. The fear of facing repercussions from political commissars, coupled with the ruthless enforcement of the not one step back policy, led to instances where Soviet troops felt compelled to advance even when the odds were against them, and even joined the German volunteer units. This all often resulted in unnecessary casualties and exacerbating the already grim situation on the battlefield. A pervasive fear of Stalin among the high command of the Soviet military led to a culture of obedience where commanders followed his directives without question, regardless of the consequences. This fear stemmed from Stalin's reputation for ruthless purges and the severe repercussions for those who dared to defy him. As a result, many high-ranking officers were hesitant to challenge Stalin's decisions or offer alternative strategies, even when they believed it could lead to disaster on the battlefield. This culture of fear and obedience contributed to a lack of innovation and critical thinking within the Soviet military leadership, ultimately impacting their ability to effectively respond to the challenges of warfare. Additionally, there was a notable lack of regard for human life within the Soviet leadership, leading to a callous approach where soldiers were sent into battle without proper consideration for their safety or well-being, training or organization. This disregard for the value of life resulted in a relentless strategy of sending wave after wave of soldiers into combat, regardless of the staggering casualties incurred. The focus was primarily on achieving military objectives at any cost, without adequate regard for the human toll exacted by such tactics. This approach further compounded the already tragic loss of life experienced by Soviet troops during World War II. The number of Soviet prisoners of war who perished in German captivity during World War II is estimated to be tragically high. It is believed that millions of Soviet soldiers were captured by German forces during the course of the war. However, due to the harsh conditions in German prisoner of war camps, including inadequate food, medical care and brutal treatment, a significant portion of these POWs did not survive their captivity. Estimates suggest that the death toll among Soviet POWs in German custody ranges from around 2 to 3 million, making it one of the deadliest aspects of the conflict for Soviet soldiers. That's what makes it particularly tragic, is the realization that the majority of Soviet soldiers were ordinary individuals, just like you and me. They were thrust into the horrors of war by Stalin's regime and treated as expendable pawns in a ruthless game of power. Sent into one deadly engagement after another, their lives were sacrificed without regard for their humanity or well-being. Regardless of one's stance on the war, the immense loss of life endured by the Soviet soldiers is undeniably heartbreaking. And with that, we conclude our video. As always, I'm eager to hear your opinions and thoughts in the comments below, so don't hesitate to drop a comment. And if you enjoyed the content, remember to hit the like button and subscribe to support the channel. You can also find my Patreon and Instagram links down below. A big thank you to all my Patreon supporters for their continued support. Today's journey has been quite interesting as we delve into these crucial details of history. But for now, it's time to bid you farewell. I look forward to our next historical adventure together. Until then, goodbye for now.